Hey everybody, welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan at Grace Lutheran, www.gracesf.com. We're doing Ashes today at noon and between 2 and 5 o'clock at the UN Civic Center BART station. But
Hi, I'm Pastor Dan Tisdale. I am doing Ashes to Go all day here in Gypsum, where I'm the pastor. So I'm the pastor of First Lutheran of Gypsum, which is on the interstate, off of the interstate I-70 in the mountains of Colorado. And it's cold today, but I'm out giving ashes to anybody who wants them, and it's really a great day. Real quick, my congregation has a worship service at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. Tonight we have simple supper at 6:30 and Ash Wednesday service at 7. And I'm going to just quickly put a plug in for Ash Wednesday that I can't say for the Bible study because I have people around. But
ashes to ashes.
What I love, 2 or 3 years ago when I first did this, I was a roving reporter for a Bible study that doesn't suck. So and that was kind of fun. For me, the reason I love Ash Wednesday and Lent is people assume it's about guilt and sort of negative emotions, and for me, it's about growing and renewal, and so I love having. If I get 50 people in a day, maybe 10 to 12 people will be members from my congregation, and a bulk of the rest are Catholics, and they're just. It's convenient for them to get ashes, whatever. But the best part is the 5 or 6 people that don't know what it is, and we get engaged in conversation about what is Lent, what is Ash Wednesday, and it's wonderful to sort of say, hey, this is just a chance for us to be realistic about who we are, and to be willing to be a little vulnerable and to be willing to grow a little bit. And that's really, to me, what Lent is most about. It's this period of growth and renewal, and so to sort of educate people a little bit about that is really great. I love doing it. So,
Woohoo!
Yeah. So come out and check me out in Gypsum, and I'm trying to stay warm. We'll see what happens.
Tell your mom that you're taking care of yourself and that you're gonna have self-care later, and do something warm so you don't get sick.
Absolutely. I'm going to start a fire at my house. We'll do it. So, all right. Have a wonderful day.
See you, Dan.
I don't know how to quit now, but I'll figure it out.
You just have to close. You just have to. There you go. I know you can do it. So that was Pastor Dan, our traveling reporter who is out in Gypsum and might or might not be still on with us, but that's okay. Today's Ash Wednesday, so I have ashes on my forehead. This morning, my kids and we put some ashes on our forehead to remember that we are dust, and to the dust we shall return. That's the traditional words that pastors say on Ash Wednesday. The reason that we do this once a year is to remember that we're going to die, and particularly for those folk who are afraid of death or afraid of dying or afraid of what that will mean for them, or they haven't been thinking about it, or they're not preparing. The idea is to think about it at least one day a year so that when death comes, it's not a giant surprise. And hopefully that it will remind us to prepare what we need to do. So for some people, my grandma's working on a giant rummage sale so that people don't have to be stuck with a house full of stuff if she passes away. That's maybe her way of getting through Lent and through Ash Wednesday. Many of us, if you're like me, have been going to just a crap load of funerals lately, and or have people who are on the brink of death, who are fighting cancer or who are having other difficulties health-wise. And Ash Wednesday can be a reminder about the circle of life, not the hold up a lion and sing song circle of life, but the circle of life in terms that you are dust, and to the dust you shall return. This idea to not take your physical body too seriously, not to take your physical possessions too seriously, not to put a lot of investment into things that aren't what you would care about on the last day of your life. And so during Lent, some people will eat fish on Fridays. And the original reason that they started doing that is that there was this Catholic village that had a bad economy, and the Pope in that area wanted to help with the economy because fishermen donated a lot to the church. And so they declared that you had to eat fish on Fridays. No, legit. That's how it started. It comes also out of a faithful tradition of fasting, this idea that you can eat less and see more of God, or that if for you food is something that is more important than God, that you have a period of time where you pay more attention to the amount of food that you eat. If you're someone who always pays too much attention to the amount of food you eat, either because you are self-conscious about your body, or if you have an eating disorder or an addiction related to food, then I would encourage you not to take on any sort of food-related fasting. Don't take on something that's going to be unhelpful for your life. That's the complete opposite of what Lent is about. There is an idea that in Lent we give up maybe things that are excessive so that we can care for the poor. It's a particular time of the year where people pay attention to ways that they can care for other people who are living in poverty. One of the things that Martin Luther did, during medieval times in the 1500s, in order to think about how we could not tokenize the poor and need people to be poor just so that we could give them alms on Ash Wednesday, because that's rude and crude and not okay, and a misuse of privilege to just be like, yay, there's poor people around and now I can give you things I don't want anymore and feel better about it. Martin Luther helped to kind of establish the welfare system in Germany because he believed that people should be able to have living wages, and that they should be able to eat enough food, and that they should be able to accomplish that part of the Lord's Prayer that says that everybody gets daily bread. And so Martin Luther really thought that for Ash Wednesday, we should sure care for people who are living in poverty, but that we should also advocate for people who are in politics to do their part. And so if you can think of things in politics right now that are going on to say that we shouldn't feed people, you get to be mad about it as a Christian and as a part of this like long journey of Christians throughout time who during this time period have been grumpy about ways that politicians have not wanted to pay for the feeding of, for whatever reason. It's changed throughout each century. Martin Luther was around during the time of the plague, the Black Death, where people literally would die from poverty, and they didn't necessarily know why or how, but it kind of seemed like it was something that was killing poor people faster than people who were richer, in part maybe because they lived in closer housing quarters. And so they were very acutely aware of death. Martin Luther was so afraid of dying and so afraid of not being right before God that it said that he had like constipation his whole life, like extreme anxiety. He called it Angfichtungen, which is like being torn and the wretched feeling you feel in your stomach from wondering if God could actually love you and name you and claim you. Luther has an insight. He almost gets hit by lightning and he realizes, what? If God does all of the work to save us, then nothing we can do could make God love us more, and nothing we could do could make God love us less, because it's all God choosing to love us. And hooray. And so the idea was that the ashes would be a celebration of what God has already done. Like, hooray, you are God's and you will go back to God. We know what will happen when you die. I've got a little bit of glitter in my ash. I don't know if you can see that. Probably you can. Some little blue sparkles in there. And because there is kind of this contemporary idea that Lent doesn't have to be about suffering. It doesn't have to only be about giving things up, but it can also be about taking on joy and looking for hope and noticing where God is present in this kooky world. And the glitter in my ashes, because this morning when we were doing ash with the kiddos, they're still really sad that their friend who was the musician at our congregation died recently. So we did a funeral like 2 Saturdays ago, and they're very sad about death. And about every night they worry that they're going to die. And so we added glitter to our ashes to remember to have fun and to celebrate life and to live fully while you do have life. Because yes, we have to take seriously this idea that we're going to die. But we also, if we are erring on the side of feeling terrible all the time, and what we need is a reminder of hope, then it's okay for Lent to help us right our ship. So like if a ship is moving from one side to another, if a ship isn't properly balanced or ballast, it can tilt, right? And the idea is to be somewhere in the middle. Aristotle talked about this in Nicomachean Ethics as the golden means, or like trying to get in the middle. So it's, if abstinence is over here and not doing anything is over here, and gluttony is over here, so just consuming so much that it is unhealthy, then what Aristotle said we should do is find that middle point, that perfect middle space between not engaging in activities that are fun and engaging in them way too much. And I think that ballast point is different for everyone. So there are some people for whom sobriety or abstinence from certain addictive things is a must for them. And there's other people where their needle might be in a different spot for where that golden middle space is, where you can be highly functioning, you can be at your best, you can enjoy life, but not enjoy it to an excess that hurts you. So we also begin this Sunday, the first Sunday in Lent, and we're experiencing Lent through the Mark cycle, and it starts with rereading the story of Jesus's baptism, which actually already happened once a couple Sundays ago. But the reason that it's super important is because immediately after Jesus's baptism, he's like flung into the wilderness. He goes there immediately. It says he's tempted by Satan, which if you don't know, or if you only know Satan through like cartoons and contemporary imaginings of Satan, then Satan's like a dude with horns, kind of like my Indonesian harvest hope faithfulness things. If they were on the back of my head like this, it probably looks like horns. But what Satan was an angel whose job it was to go down from heaven and question humans to see if they were as faithful behind God's back as they were when God was with them. So the idea was that God lived up in the sky and God would come down and visit every once in a while. And when God came to visit, everybody was on their best behavior. And Satan's job was to come down and ask you questions like a pop quiz, a God pop quiz, to see if you were still going to be faithful when God wasn't looking. And Martin Luther used to imagine Satan asking questions like during the night. So it's like the voice in the back of your head that's like, you're not really that great. You're terrible. Why do you even make videos? Why do you look ugly in those pants, right? The idea was that was the voice of Satan. It was testing you to see if you could really be faithful, if you could really have hope, if you could really hold on to the light when no one was looking. No one can. No one's perfect, right? But in this story, Jesus goes out into the wilderness, and wildernesses and deserts are places where you encounter God. Jesus goes into the wilderness, and I always thought Jesus went into the wilderness to fast, and he does in some of the Gospels, but in the Gospel of Mark, he has angels who like wait on him, which means they brought him food, right? They brought him food. An angel just means like a stranger, a person who's not, like, it would be the equivalent of saying an undocumented person. So there were people unknown to him who were aliens to his land who served him food and took care of him and showed him hospitality during this time that like the voices in the back of his head were causing him to wonder if he was beloved by God. So he had just had a baptism. A bird comes through the sky and is like, you are my beloved. It's amazing. And then he immediately goes into the wilderness and is like, but am I good enough? I can't do any of this. And strangers, and this would explain why in Mark's gospel, Jesus is always saying, yeah, but don't be so mean to the people who are from other places. He goes to other countries and expands who is a part of God's chosen people. And he doesn't necessarily dislike people just because they're from a different land or they're not from a different space. And so maybe it's because of this time, his 40 days in the wilderness. It's also a callback. It's a callback to Moses. And there's a callback to Elijah, that Jesus is sort of like Elijah when he goes through the water, because Elijah and Moses both parted the waters and kind of walked through them. And then last Sunday in the Transfiguration, where Jesus goes on top of a mountain and Moses and Elijah show up, you're like, oh yeah, makes sense. They all know how to do that trick with the water. Right? So there's a lot of allusions to old biblical texts that are happening in these stories. There's also like this very human idea that like voices nag us, and it's so easy to get caught up in the chaos. It's so easy to get stuck in the like, oh, there's dirt in my forehead. And if I can't go out in public, because if I go out in public, people will look at me funny. Or if I go to my work today with a smudge of ash on my head, everyone's going to think I'm dumb. Or even like to be a pastor and be like, there's glitter on my head. People who are really faithful to the ancient ways are going to be like, you can't put glitter on your head. And all these things are true. All these things are very real voices. People have their own way of like grasping God. But Jesus went off into the desert to like suck it up, to like get some energy or some chutzpah, as I translated in my version of the Gospel of Mark, and then goes out and tries to do good things in the world. And if you read the rest of the Gospel of Mark, you'll notice that Jesus tries to like go off and like be alone, but he never gets to be alone for the rest of the story. And he's always like, I need to go and like get some more chutzpah. And they're like, no, we need you too much. We will grab your clothing and we will get healing. That's a Gospel of Mark thing. So the other readings that are going to happen, there's a reading about Noah's Ark and about God establishing a covenant with the people of Israel. This covenant language is really important. It's just a fancy word for like God sends you a Valentine. It's like, you're mine forever. And I didn't just say that because it's Valentine's today, but it helps. So a covenant is like a promise. I'm going to love you forever. I'm going to love all of the generations that come after you forever. And it's the covenant that God established with Jewish people and that remains with Jewish people. It's important to say because there's been a lot of anti-Semitism in Christianity. So this covenant exists and is still intact. And in the conversation with Noah, the idea is that God puts a bow in the sky, a rainbow, to say that I'm never going to like do bad things or hurt humankind again. It's an interesting covenant because we know if you just have to read like a couple more chapters in the story to see that God like goes off and is like, everyone dies, but I'm going to use a volcano instead of water. Like, okay. So God doesn't necessarily stick to that promise. God changes methods a lot throughout both the Hebrew scriptures and the Greek scriptures. God's like, so I'm going to try like putting a rainbow in the sky. Will that work? No. Okay. Let's try volcanoes. Will that work? No. Okay. Let's try sending my Jesus son to be life, death, and resurrection. Will that work? No. Okay, people are still grumpy, and Christians still fight with each other and with everyone else, and they still argue about who I love and who I don't love. Bah! Right? That's my imagination of God and why God changes the way that God does. I think the most important part of both the rainbow in the sky story and of this story of remembering that we are dust and to the dust we shall return, and remembering that Jesus has to go out into the wilderness is just knowing that God is going to go where we go. Like the words of Ruth, where you go, I will go, where you trod, I will trod, where you lie, I will lie, and your God will be my God. And this idea that God is going to go on this journey wherever our journey goes, whether it's a pilgrimage journey or a journey down into the depths of muck and dung, or like through prison or to the fanciest academic spaces or really high up in politics. God's going to go to all those spaces, and it might look like a kaleidoscope where it looks a little bit different for each person, and you notice God in different ways because of your own ways of living in the world. But that doesn't mean that God likes you better than everyone else on the planet. You have to imagine God being able to come through many, many expressions, and sometimes those expressions look like Jesus, and sometimes those expressions look like a bodhisattva, and sometimes those expressions look like remembering death through beautiful skulls, right? So God comes to people in lots of diverse ways. Just enjoy the fact that God loves you and names you and claims you without having to figure out God's relationship for other people, or like telling them God doesn't love them because God doesn't love them the exact same way of you. It's an age-old thing for siblings to fight about how parents love them and who's loved the best and who got the coolest toys and who blah, 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 blah. But here's what I hope that you'll remember during this Lenten time. Number one, you are loved and named and claimed by God no matter how diverse you are, whether you err on the side of being muck on the forehead or fabulous glitter that sparkles and shines and everyone notices. Like, right? God loves you. That's not a question. Anyone who has told you otherwise is a liar, because God does all the work to love you, and you can't screw it up. Number two, remember to take care of people who have less than you. If you are doing things in excess and it's making you unhealthy, maybe take the opportunity to do less of it. And if doing less of it makes it possible for other people to have as much as they need, then that's a really, really cool thing. And so clean out your closets if you've got too much, clean out your fridge if you've got too much food, care for other people who are in need, and if you've got good health, help others who don't have hands that work the way that they would like to in the past. If you're good at remembering how to, I don't know, send thank you letters, help someone who needs a lot of thank you letters sent but doesn't have the time to do them. Right? Easy peasy. And then step three, if you are someone who is afraid of dying or doesn't think about death, get your life in order so that your death will be easier, right? So live and love and be bold. Tell those that you haven't told in a while that you love them. And if you need to, get your power of attorney set up and work on your health care directives, and maybe clean out the clutter in your house so that people don't have a big mess to take care of if you passed away tomorrow, and err on the side of remembering that God loves you and names you and claims you. That's all. From the dust you came, and to the dust you shall return. Until next time, take care, y'all. I love you.